Orban and Meloni surprise Brussels with bold move, but the real shock isn't what they did, it's how calmly they did it. Turns out Brussels can handle endless committees and billion-euro crises, but two leaders thinking for themselves. Now that's an emergency. If you're already seeing the shift drop alike, these moments are changing Europe faster than headlines can catch up.
Szerencsére Brüsszel nem Moszkva. Moszkva tragédia volt. Brüsszel csak egy rosszul sikerült kortárs paródia.
When news broke that Viktor Orban and Giorgia Meloni had pulled off a political maneuver that left Brussels scrambling for an explanation, most EU officials acted like they'd just discovered a hidden trapdoor under the conference table. And honestly, who could blame them? For years, Brussels operated under the comfortable assumption that Orban was a distant nuisance and Meloni a manageable newcomer.
Always consider the European identity as fact, established by history even before geography.
But this time, both leaders walked into the halls of power with a shared message that upended the usual choreography. Europe is not a monologue, and the era of quiet compliance is officially over. To understand why this moment rattled so many in Brussels, you have to picture how the EU typically works. Meetings are staged like theater, statements are crafted like press releases, and dissent is treated like an unexpected fire drill. Everything is supposed to look polished, predictable, and perfectly aligned. Orban has long refused to play along with that script, but Meloni's presence at his side changes the math entirely. When Italy, the founding member, the G7 economy, the country nobody can shove into a corner, shares a stage with Hungary, the spectacle becomes something else. A political earthquake disguised as polite conversation. What Orban and Meloni did wasn't loud, dramatic, or chaotic.
But of course what I'm doing is too harsh. But I said this is the only way. If you would like to defend your country, there is only one single regulation.
In fact, it was the quietness that frightened Brussels the most. Their message wasn't delivered with shouting or threats, but with the calm confidence of leaders who know the winds in Europe are shifting. The symbolism alone hit harder than any speech. Standing together, they represented the thing the EU establishment has always feared. Not rebellion, but normalization, national sovereignty becoming mainstream again. And once something becomes normal, it can't be dismissed as fringe anymore.
I have various and many impressions collecting at meetings recently, in the last 6 months.
It becomes a conversation Brussels actually has to address. What makes this even more interesting is that both leaders chose Rome as the stage for their move. A city that remembers power like old stone remembers footsteps. When Meloni welcomed Orban to Palazzo Chigi, it wasn't just another diplomatic meet and greet. It was a message carved in political marble. The debate over Europe's future is no longer being dictated exclusively from Brussels or Berlin.
Prior to the Prime Minister Summit of European Union, we regularly have a meeting of anti-migration countries. Denmark, Italy.
Italy, long treated like the EU's emotional younger sibling, just asserted itself as one of the new power centers, a place where decisions aren't only received, but shaped. Behind closed doors, their conversations cut straight to the pressure points Europe has tried to avoid for years: migration, energy autonomy, fiscal flexibility. And the question nobody at the top wants to say out loud: whether Brussels has quietly drifted too far from the citizens it claims to represent.
Political EU. She isn't simply calling for a more federal Europe with more power in Brussels. Rather, Meloni wants to, quote, move beyond the somewhat stale debate between more Europe and less Europe.
These are the kinds of topics EU officials usually prefer to wrap in layers of committee language and regulatory phrasing. But Orban and Meloni stripped the varnish away. They weren't speaking to bureaucrats. They were speaking to voters who live with the consequences of policies written hundreds of kilometers away. Migration was front and center as always. Italy has carried the practical burden for years, while other member states offered sympathy rather than solutions.
Just a clarification as well. I'm not here to ask how President Trump to manage my conflicts or our conflicts with the European Union. this is our matter, so we will do it.
Hungary, meanwhile, has built its entire political identity around border control and sovereignty. When these two align on migration, it's not symbolic, it's strategic. Their argument is simple. A union that cannot control its borders cannot claim to speak for its citizens. Brussels calls that rhetoric divisive. Millions of Europeans call it accurate. And this alignment transforms long-standing complaints into a coordinated doctrine that can't be waved away as emotional politics.
We can get from United
and maybe
States.
Europe too. You know, we can include Europe, but it's going to get more difficult.
So inside the European Union, we will manage all of our affairs. To be the most possible humble guy, yeah?
Energy was another pillar of their discussion. With Europe caught between global volatility and environmental commitments, many countries feel trapped between dependence and idealism. Orban has always pushed for autonomy, even when criticized for it. Meloni, navigating Italy's energy challenges, recognizes the appeal of diversifying partnerships and reducing vulnerability. Together, they challenge the Brussels model of centralized energy directives.
But I'm the longest-serving Prime Minister of Europe. I survived all the Prime Ministers who attacked us. And I'm sure we will survive next years as well. So we will manage our conflicts successfully.
Instead, they argue for a Europe where countries adapt policies to their own geography, resources, and economic realities. It's not rebellion, it's realism, and realism is contagious. Agree or disagree, leave a comment. This conversation is already happening behind closed doors. Let's bring it out in the open. Then there's the geopolitical undercurrent. With Donald Trump back in the White House, the calculus changes dramatically. Whatever one thinks of him, Trump doesn't treat Europe the way previous presidents did. He rewards assertiveness and punishes indecision.
Clear. But what we are speaking about here is more than that. Because without the pressure coming from the United States government, I'm speaking 2022.
For leaders like Orban and Meloni, this is an opportunity rather than a threat. They can reframe their approach not as defiance, but as alignment with a new transatlantic language, one centered on interests, strength, and sovereignty. Suddenly, questioning Brussels no longer looks like isolation, it looks like adaptation. And this is where the EU hierarchy feels the tremor most. The old formula, Germany leads, Brussels decides, everyone else follows, hasn't been working for a while.
The Europeans would not take that hard line, what they have today on the war. Remember that big countries of Europe rejected to be involved more than just sending some, humanitarian issues.
Germany is wrestling with economic strain. France is distracted by internal pressure and diplomatic overstretch. Into that vacuum steps a coalition of states tired of being scolded for wanting agency. Italy, Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic, sometimes jokingly called the Patriots Alliance, are no longer content with symbolic influence. They want structural influence. And the shift is already happening, whether Brussels admits it or not.
We have said many times that growth has been slowing down for a long time in Europe, but we've ignored it.
The fascinating part is that none of these leaders are talking about leaving the EU. There are no flags burning, no Article 50 letters, no melodramatic exits. What they want is much more disruptive, staying inside the Union, but reshaping it from within. They're not trying to break the system. They're trying to break the hierarchy. That's far more unsettling for Brussels because it rewrites the EU's power distribution without tearing down the institution itself. It's evolution through pressure.
We will not be part of their inner circles because we prefer the public squares, and we will not be part of their mainstream.
Pressure applied by democratically elected governments, not unhinged revolutionaries. Meloni, in particular, plays a dual role with remarkable precision. In public, she appears cooperative, constructive, moderate. In private, she is building alliances, shifting leverage, and redrawing Europe's internal balance. Italy has become the bridge between East and West, between dissent and diplomacy. Orban brings ideological clarity. Meloni brings legitimacy. And together, they produce something the EU hasn't seen in decades.
I'm sure we can make a deal, and I'm here to help on that. I cannot deal in the name of the European Union.
A challenge that is both intellectual and political. not screaming from the fringes, but negotiating from the center. Meanwhile, Brussels finds itself cornered by its own contradictions. It preaches unity but struggles with diversity. It promotes cooperation but punishes deviation. It demands loyalty yet rarely listens. And now, as more countries begin whispering about sovereignty, realism, and a Europe of nations, the whispers are turning into open conversations.
I think the best way is that we simply speak frankly about the needs that every one of us has and find ourselves in the middle, for that's useful for all.
Some Northern European governments have already started adopting the same language, albeit more softly. Even Western politicians who once rolled their eyes at Orban now privately admit that something in the EU framework feels increasingly disconnected from ordinary citizens. This is why the Orban-Meloni move matters. It's not a headline, it's a hinge moment. A pivot that reveals where Europe is leaning, even before policymakers acknowledge it out loud.
So I have some experience how to run dramatic economic reforms to make your country more competitive. But that kind of leadership is lacking in Europe at this moment. So I don't see any country.
Brussels can dismiss one leader. It can marginalize two. But when 5, 6, or 7 capitals start aligning on the same philosophy sovereignty with cooperation, unity without uniformity, the gravitational pull becomes impossible to ignore. At some point, it stops being resistance and becomes reality. And if you listen closely, you can already hear the cracks in the old narrative. The more the EU establishment tries to discipline dissent, the stronger that dissent becomes.
Dunque, buon pomeriggio a tutti.
Tornare a essere protagonista nel mondo, la denatalità.
So when Orban and Meloni stepped out for that seemingly routine photo op in Rome, the real story wasn't the handshake, it was the quiet confidence behind it. A declaration not shouted, not chanted, but spoken through alignment that Europe's future will not be shaped by committees alone. It will be shaped by nations willing to reclaim agency inside the very system built to bind them together.
But I'm sure that together we are stronger, and I have to find a way. I'm here to find the best way to make us both stronger on the two shores of the Atlantic.
And whether Brussels likes it or not, that chapter has already begun. If this isn't about rebellion but realignment, then what comes next? Hit subscribe. We're tracking the quiet shifts shaping Europe's future.